Governors and distinguished guests, please rise for the presentation of the colors, followed by our national anthem. Presenting the colors today are the junior ROTC cadets from Coventry High School. Cadet Lieutenant, junior grade, Alexia Donnelly. Cadet Lieutenant, Keontae Frey Roberts. Cadet Ensign, Michael Herard. Cadet Chief Petty Officer, Jacob Fernandez. Performing the national anthem is 15-year-old Lexi Lanny from Bristol, Rhode Island. Please remain standing until the color guard exits the hall.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight with the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that her flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Well, I would like to welcome everyone to the great state of Rhode Island and the official opening of the 2017 summer meeting of the nation's Governors Association. Before I get started, I would like to recognize some of the very distinguished guests who we have with us. I would ask if they please stand when we recognize you. I would first, as you will see at this summer meeting, that first, this is the first time we've actually had a head of state. Prime Minister Trudeau will be with us today. In addition, we have representatives from all over the globe to show the growing importance of the governors and dealing with international trade and business development issues around the globe, and that we as governors want to do direct relationships with many of these countries and many of these businesses who have come to visit us here at the NGA, and I thank them. I also first want to thank China. I want to thank Ambassador Kui T and Kai from China He and his group were here yesterday. If we could give them a great round of applause for hosting our opening lunch. And I thank Governor Hogan for his stellar introduction yesterday at that lunch and the great attributes of the great state of Maryland next to the great Commonwealth of Virginia. I would also like to reference Premier Brian Gallant and Canadian Premier Kathleen Wynne from Canada, who are here with us. If you give them a great round of applause. Governor Shinji Hirai and Governor Tizo Mikazuki from Japan. Give them a round of applause, please. Mayor Miguel Angel Marsura from Mexico. Round of applause for the entire Mexican delegation who have joined us here today. As we kick off this meeting, I also want to take a moment to recognize the support of many of our partners and supporters who we could not have this meeting without your support and funds, our best practices, and all the different initiatives of the governors. For nearly 30 years, the NGA has partnered with the private sector through our newly relaunched NGA Partners program. The NGA Partners help support the organization not only financially, but intellectually, with the sharing of best practices, as well as helping the NGA stay tuned in the emergency policy trends that are happening in our individual states. A big thank you to all of our partners who are here with us today. Governors, thank them. Next, I would like to, where's Governor Raimondo? Where is our host governor? Well, we're going to skip that. I'll let her, as soon as she gets here, we'll hear from our opening governor. I would like to first of all have an adoption and for a motion for the adoption of the rules of procedure for this meeting. Would anyone make the motion? Governor Malloy, may I have a second? All those in thank Governor Haslam, and all those in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. The motion is approved. Governors, as you know, under our policy process, we adopt policies for 2 years at our winter meeting. If anyone has questions regarding the policies, I would ask you to see Anna Davis of the NGA staff while you are here over the course of this weekend. I would now like to announce the appointment of the following governors to the nominating committee for the 2016-2017 NGA Executive. I'd like to welcome Vice Chair Governor Sandoval, who is here with us today. If we give the governor a great round of applause. So let me start off by saying, first of all, my main goal when launching my initiative, which was cybersecurity, was to elevate the importance of cybersecurity on every single governor's agenda. I wanted to highlight why cybersecurity was more than just an information technology issue. I wanted to show you that cybersecurity is a health issue, an educational issue, a public safety issue, and an economic issue, as well as a democracy issue. When I launched my initiative, I did not imagine that cybersecurity would have captured the national headlines through so many different events that we experienced, including last year's presidential election. As you know, in November, thousands of internet-connected devices, including security cameras that were an ocean away, were used to launch a cyber attack that took down several popular web services such as Netflix, as well as the New York Times. This May, we saw a cyber attack that the world has never experienced before. The WannaCry ransomware locked out users from all across the globe and made it impossible for doctors and other practitioners to access their devices. Experts today are still assessing the impact of this incident, and potentially more worrisome that we are now seeing adversaries use cyber attacks to undermine the core democratic values by attempting to influence elections, not only here, but as well as in Europe. These are troubling times, yet through our new initiative and the continuing commitment of all of you, we have now convened experts from cybersecurity policy, from the state government, from the private sector, to higher education, and to all the federal agencies involved to discuss this critical issue and to identify ways for all of us to meet the threat. Let me just say, as it relates to Virginia, In Virginia, we have taken very significant steps over the past 3 years to address cybersecurity for our Commonwealth for now and beyond. We are in a very unique position in Virginia. We have the largest naval base in the world. We have the Pentagon, the Central Intelligence Agency, Quantico, and 27 military installations that are constantly under assault. We've come a long way in strengthening our systems and our policies. Last year, we expanded cybersecurity apprenticeships for the first time in Virginia's history. We're now allowing businesses to stand up registered apprenticeships for cybersecurity occupations. In Virginia, if you will come work for the state for 2 years, we will pay your education to get a cybersecurity degree. We've created partnerships to strengthen cybersecurity employment and educational opportunities and scholarships around the Commonwealth. I launched the Cyber Vets Virginia program to provide cybersecurity training to our veterans. Today in Virginia, we have 36,000 open cyber jobs. We now have nearly 600 cyber companies. Those 36,000 jobs, the starting pay is $88,000. You do not need a 4-year degree. It is a 2-year degree or less, and it's imperative for all of us as governors to make sure we're building that workforce of the 21st century. Earlier this year, Virginia entered a strategic partnership with Amazon Web Services and the Virginia Cyber Range to make Virginia a national resource center for cybersecurity education. Virginia has an award-winning cybersecurity program in place. We can build on that strong foundation, but as we all know as governors, it requires continued diligence. We might be in great shape today, but tomorrow, some new cyber hacker is going to come up with some latest technology to get into our system. Government is a very attractive target for our cyber criminals. As you know, we have collectively more data than the federal government. Through our driver's licenses, through our health care, our Medicaid programs, for our state tax returns, many of the cyber hackers feel that the best opportunity to get that data is to come into the states because of the wealth of data that we have. So it takes a commitment of all the governors to keep our families and our businesses safe. These threats do not stop at state lines. Since July, we have accomplished a lot since we met. We've held a series of roundtables focusing on the cybersecurity risks facing the health sector, critical infrastructure, educational institutions, and small businesses. We have also spent significant time highlighting the opportunities cybersecurity presents for all of us and the opportunities of a more connected society and a vibrant technology economy. As you know, we have held 2 sold-out events, 2 regional summits, one in Boston and San Jose, where many of you have sent teams of state officials to discuss pertinent cybersecurity issues and to identify implementable goals and objectives to move our states forward. As I've said from day one, if we do a great job in Virginia, but there are states that don't do anything as it relates to cybersecurity, they will reach our state through a back door, through a healthcare provider, insurance provider, or some other business that is doing business with both of our states. So these summits culminated in a national summit in June, where I was proud to say 45 states attended and learned about how future cyber trends and how to use innovative technology to mitigate those threats. At our winter meeting, many of you may recall that we gave each one of you a cyber scorecard, which no one else saw but yourselves, that highlighted the areas where you are exceeding, areas that you could use a little more help, and areas that you need your full and immediate attention. This continues to be a useful high-level tool that you and your team can utilize to track your progress. Our Cyber Best Practices Center now has the updated report cards for all of you. We were also joined in February by Admiral Michael Rogers, the commander of the U.S. Cybercom and the director of the National Security Agency, for an off-the-record discussion on how states, the National Guard, and the Cyber Command can work together. He stressed to all of us governors that we are at the forefront, that he cannot do his job as head of the National Security Agency if we in the states are not doing our part. We held a joint governor-senator meeting on cybersecurity priorities and challenges of the United States Congress. We had a great group of governors to meet. Governor Sandoval and I went up and met with the leadership of the House and the Senate. We have implored the Congress to have a cybersecurity committee. One does not exist today in the Congress. It is spread among many of the different committees, and there is jurisdictional territories where people have not wanted to give up some of their jurisdiction, we once again, as governors, call upon the Congress to put together a national committee to deal with this issue and to put funding in so that we, at the state level, can do our jobs. Lastly, we put together 18 documents that highlighted the recommendations and best practices of the National Guard, cybersecurity response plans, and workforce development. That you can all implement in your states starting today. You all have those documents in front of you, and they're maintained at the NGA Cyber Resource page, nga.org, meet the trend. This is the package that all of you have in front of you. It has all the latest data. It has what you need to do as a governor to make sure that your state is up and meeting the threat of cybersecurity. What we saw last fall was only the beginning. Richard Clark, who is a national expert on cybersecurity, advisor for 4 presidents, briefed me the other day and said the actions that we saw last year as it relates to Russia and other nation states is only the beginning. It is only going to ramp up, and they want to ramp up by coming after that state data. So I would say it is incumbent upon us as governors to make sure that we are doing our part to keep our states and our nation safe. Most of you have begun implementing these recommendations. We say thank you. Since the launch of my initiative, over 30 governors have now signed an executive order or legislation or announced a cybersecurity initiative. This now has resulted in a dozen executive orders, 14 signed bills, and 17 initiatives. In Idaho, for example, Governor Otter is implementing recommendations made by his cybersecurity governance body and has recently named a state cybersecurity director. In New Mexico, Governor Martinez signed legislation clarifying when the National Guard can be used during a cyber event. In Oregon, Governor Brown signed an executive order to unify all cybersecurity efforts into one agency. Lastly, our incoming chair, Governor Sandoval, recently signed a bill to create a cyber defense center to lead all their cyber projects in their state. And more can be done. There now are at least 34 pending bills in state legislatures that you can all help advocate for and push through so that it can land on your desk to sign. Although these are great accomplishments, we must never, ever become complacent. Criminals and foreign adversaries will continue to pursue vulnerabilities in our defenses that will harm our citizens, cripple our critical infrastructure, and steal our resources. That is why my initiative will live on through the NGA's Resource Center for State Cybersecurity that I have been privileged to co-chair with Governor Snyder. Through this center, the NGA staff will continue to assist your states and implement best practices and be a lasting resource for you and your staff. Before we go on to our speakers in our discussion, I do want to give a special shout out to Jeff and Tim and ask them and all the folks who worked on cybersecurity if they could stand up and if you could give them a great round of applause for the great work that they have done. Thank you, gentlemen. And before we get to the speakers, I see that our host governor has arrived. I know she was busy doing some interviews outside, but I would like to turn it over to you if you would like to give an opening statement. I do want to thank Governor Raimondo for hosting in this beautiful state this great NGA summer meeting. I'm very proud to say that a record number 33 governors and 1,800 folks have signed up to come to this, which is by far more than 3 times more than we've ever had. I know it's because of our great governor and the great state of Rhode Island, but I do want to thank you. I know the time and work that you put into this, Gina. So on behalf of all the governors, thank you, and it's great to be in Rhode Island.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Good morning. For those of you who I haven't seen yet, welcome to Rhode Island. We are very pleased with the turnout. It has broken every record, as I understand it. So I want to thank all of you, some of whom have traveled very far to be here. I appreciate that. I also want to thank and acknowledge Terry for his leadership on this issue. It is true that you'll be leaving us as the chair, but I think you should feel great about your legacy because you started an initiative that many of us have followed. I know I did. I signed an executive order around cyber, put a task force in place, and have hired for the first time ever a director of cyber and homeland security reporting directly to me. So I think we're all doing our part. The hardest part of all of this, of course, is behavior change. And I would love to hear, technology is one thing, resources are one thing. This is really about getting people to change the way they do, when they log on, if they change passwords, how they do their business, and that's even harder than the technology. And so I think as we go forward under Governor Sandoval's leadership, anything we can do to focus on that would be helpful. But we're thrilled to have everybody in Rhode Island. I want to make a quick plug. At noon, we're having a governors-only session with two important CEOs, the CEO of CVS, Larry Merlo, and the CEO of IGT, both very substantial companies and sponsors of this event. That's at noon, governors only, and I'd love it if all of you guys could be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. So back to the cybersecurity, to add a little more context to the issue that we have been discussing. We're honored today that we have three great speakers with us, and I appreciate them coming to be with us today. Matt Spence is a partner at the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. Chris Bream is the Chief Technology Officer at Tanium, and Wes Kremer from the Raytheon Company, the Vice President and President of Raytheon Integrated Defense Systems. These distinguished speakers are here to provide a window into the future of cybersecurity, what it will mean for our states, and how we can take advantage of the tremendous opportunities in this sector. I'd now like to turn it over to Matt. Matt, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Governor McAuliffe, thank you for the invitation to speak about cybersecurity, and in particular for your initiative in raising this issue to the governors in this area. By way of background, I'm a partner of the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. We are a venture capital firm that invests in new and exciting and emerging technologies. Everything from artificial intelligence, to drones, to financial technology, to health technology, to companies like Airbnb and Lyft, and a huge amount in cybersecurity companies. Companies like Tanium, where Chris is at, and other companies that we look at to have some of the most exciting technologies which have a huge impact on the work that all of you are doing. Before I was in Andreessen Horowitz, I spent time in national security positions in the Obama administration. I was at the White House, at the National Security Council, where I spent hundreds of hours in the White House Situation Room, dealing with everything from the planning of the operation against Osama bin Laden, to trade issues, to increasingly cybersecurity issues, which really were some of the most serious and significant, which pervaded nearly everything that we talked about. I then spent time as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense dealing with some of those issues from the defense perspective. So I say that by way of framing to take two different perspectives to open up about what we think about some of the cybersecurity issues, both from the Situation Room to, in a sense, the boardroom, or what companies and states face every day. And where things are going, I want to say two things that may seem a little counterintuitive. If the question is, where is cybersecurity going the next 5 to 10 years, part of the question is to look back 10 years. It was 10 years ago last month that the iPhone came out as a product, something that has fundamentally changed the way we think about commerce and we think about other types of things. But if you actually look back, the conversation about cybersecurity has not changed very much over the last 5 years. We still talk very much about the upcoming Pearl Harbor of a cyber attack. We talk enormously about the threat, but actually what has happened and what needs to change has not changed very much. The fundamental issue is not actually one of technology, as Governor Raimondo said, but is fundamentally one of human behavior. It is doing some of the basic work of hygiene and good health related to cybersecurity and changing behaviors that leave us all vulnerable. And that's in particular where governors and political leadership comes in. The second thing I want to say is there actually are tremendous opportunities we're not necessarily paying attention to. When I was at the Defense Department, I headed up working on Middle East policy. And one thing that it's very easy to do is talk all about the threats. And you hear about the threats and you basically want to go home and take a nap and not have to worry about what's going on. What we don't spend time talking about as much is what the opportunities are. And I would say as we think about the threats of cybersecurity, a critical part of the conversation is not to talk about the enormous opportunities here. The Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, driverless cars, the enormous amount of connectedness that we have do create vulnerabilities that we need to be thinking about how to coordinate and stop from hurting us. But at the same time, the very innovation that drives those technologies is critical to driving our economy. And as we think about what the role of governors and regulation are to do it, it's to come up with the right balance to continue to encourage that innovation, encourage the types of technologies which do create threats, but to continue to use that to drive our economy and to try to turn to technology to help us address and mitigate some of the cyber threats that we're dealing with today.
Thank you, Governor McAuliffe. It's really great to be here with leaders from across the country addressing an issue that's so important to us. The work the National Governors Association has started over the past 5 years and that's been accelerated by Governor McAuliffe's leadership is strengthening our nation's cyber resiliency. Raytheon is a company that many of you know. We have employees in 46 of the 50 states. I oversee Raytheon's integrated defense systems business. This includes radars, air and missile defense systems, command and control systems, maritime systems. We have a strong manufacturing base. In many ways, Raytheon looks like a lot of companies in your states, and we are a cyber company. For Raytheon, cyber investments started with protecting our own products, our own networks on which sensitive data resides, and then it was natural to take those lessons to our customers. For the past decade, we've invested billions of dollars in developing disruptive technologies for network defenders of the warfighters. In fact, I would argue that every business is a cyber company. Every company that relies on networks, computers, devices, sensors, databases, manufacturing automation, and intellectual property that you want to protect. The unique thing about the cyber domain is how dynamic it is. The tech landscape is constantly changing, the user landscape is changing, and the threatscape is always changing and rapidly advancing. So the work that you've started here at the National Governors Association is just a beginning for each of you. Cyber is an issue that's here to stay, along with education, healthcare, jobs, and public safety, as it touches all of those. Cybersecurity has changed dramatically in less than a decade, from an IT issue protecting networks and intellectual property to actually protecting our very way of life. When everything is connected, everything is vulnerable. As a result, we see cybersecurity, even for commercial companies, as a national security issue. Multiple times over the past year, we've been reminded by cyber attacks that they're easily launched, they're far-reaching, they have global implications, and that's really the challenge. The cyber threat has become more sophisticated as nation states and cyber criminals invest more resources in cyber attacks because the return on their investment is so great. There's no doubt that the cyber domain is now a contested domain. For states with large research universities, you probably know this rather well, as state schools with important research work being done are important targets. And so let me just take you through a simple example. A professor working at one of your research universities doing something in high-powered lasers. Clearly, engineer, probably a gadget guy like me, invests early adopter of technology, got one of those neat garage door openers that you can control with Wi-Fi. You can close your garage door when the kids forget to close it no matter where you are in the world. Bought it 5 or 6 years ago. The circuit cards in that probably didn't come from the United States. There's certainly been no firmware updates in the last 6 years. Controls it from his iPhone, and now there's an instant gateway. Once you're on someone's iPhone, access to your bank records, access to medical records, and more importantly in this case, probably remote access to his research work that he's doing at the university. Now you've just turned something simple from a gadget bought 5 or 6 years ago, connected through an iPhone. It's now a national security issue. And so it's fair to say that if a cyber war were to come, it's going to come across commercially owned networks and will threaten commercially owned infrastructure. We believe that companies and states must see their presence in the cyber domain through a national security lens. This will become even more important as we rely more heavily on automation, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things for everyday devices. That's why Raytheon created ForcePoint, a commercial cybersecurity company to take the technologies that we developed for the defense and intelligence community to the commercial sector. The work you're doing here is important and should continue. States have a major role to play in developing our workforce, strengthening the resiliency of critical services, and making our nation safer. So I look forward to continuing the discussion here this morning. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Governor McAuliffe, for the opportunity to speak, and Governor Raimondo for hosting us here. I am particularly excited to have this opportunity because in addition to sitting in front of a number of governors, I actually started my career in the public sector. I worked for a local government. I was Virginia born, bred, and raised. Pretty proud of that as well. And after I worked for a little bit in the public sector, I had an opportunity to see the kind of challenges that the public sector is facing. I now work at Tanium after spending a few years at Facebook. Tanium is a company that works with a number of the Fortune 500, including 12 of the top 15 banks. And Governor Raimondo mentioned in the beginning a little bit about human behavior and the importance of human behavior when it comes to security. And actually that resonates quite a bit with me, in part because I want to talk a little bit about the human behavior of the governors that are surrounded here, the people that are at these tables. One of the things that I worry about from a security perspective is fatigue, right? You hear it all the time. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. The sky is falling. I think Wes was mentioning going to take a nap after hearing about this. And what I worry about is the opportunity for us to kind of get resigned. I saw this the other day. There was another attack on the Ukraine, and the official government Twitter account of the Ukraine tweeted a cartoon of a dog in a flaming house that had a caption that said, "This is fine." Everything was on fire. They were under attack. They were having a series of issues, and they just sort of resigned to that fact. Now, I certainly respect the fact that they could handle that with such comedy, I suppose. But at the same time, it's tough to see a situation where we would become that resigned, and certainly, as governors, that's not the way that we do things. I have sat and watched as a constituent, of course, and as an interested party, what all you governors have done in healthcare, in infrastructure, in energy, in education, in a number of other areas, and you're really leading the way, and I think that you all know that. Now, what's interesting about that is many of the initiatives that you all are undertaking are filled with technology. There's technology throughout. You're making things more connected, you're putting in devices everywhere to help make sure that your constituents' lives are improved. That's going to be really important, and security is going to be a really important part of what makes that successful, right? We will have a number of challenges. We will always have challenges in the security space, and over time, with the things that you guys are leading on, it's going to be a scale issue. How do you handle the gigantic number of connected devices, the things that give your constituents the things that you're looking for? The key here is to make sure that you're considering security throughout all of this life cycle, through the technology that you're using. There are really two things that I think that you all can focus on when you're thinking about this. One is to use your convening power. Bring together the public and private sector. Have them discuss, figure out ways in which they can work together to solve some of these problems. And then I think really focus on ushering a new world or a new set of expectations, right? You have a number of powers, including around how you purchase and including security in the way that you do acquisitions. You can really drive things. You can change the agenda for the private sector if you need to, and certainly you're already driving the agenda for the public sector. Again, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to an opportunity to talk a little bit about these challenges, and thank you very much for the time.
Well, thank you. Now we'll move to questions, but before we do, obviously a big part of cybersecurity is making sure that we have a workforce to deal with and make sure that we are actually moving forward on building that workforce of the 21st century. Along those lines, Governor Hutchinson, this morning, he and I kicked off a coding event for young girls who were here today. It was a spectacular event, and it really comes down to the teachers. And I'm honored today that we have a very special teacher with us today. Her name is Sydney Chafee. She's a humanities teacher at the Codman Academy Public Charter School in Massachusetts. She teaches history, government, but she transforms those classes into authentic lessons to prepare her students for the future. I'm happy to announce that in April of this year, Sydney was named the National Teacher of the Year for the United States of America, Not only does she have the honor, but tonight she will be throwing out the first pitch. If we want to go with her today to see the Boston Red Sox, she'll be throwing that pitch out. So if we could all recognize and thank Sydney for being here with us today. Thank you, Sydney. Mention what we did this morning. I think that was something very special that the NGA did today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to applaud you for your leadership on this issue. Just the awareness of it for the governors is critically important, as well as the pledge that we have made to do more in the area of cybersecurity. And I'm glad you mentioned the Girls Who Code initiative this morning. They're working right now as we speak on their different projects, and we'll hear more about them later. But you know, in Arkansas, you mentioned the workforce, and it really ties in as part of our initiative. It is to prepare teachers to teach computer science, STEM education, to encourage the students to take it. We've had enormous success in that. We mandated to be offered in every school. We've retrained teachers. But sort of a flip side or a complementary side of coding is the cybersecurity. And we have, for the first time, conducted a risk assessment in Arkansas on the cyber threats. We have looked at a coordinating agency, our Department of Information Services, to coordinate that response capability. We're doing the workforce side of it. But if Wes or one of the could just speak to the relationship between coding and computer science being taught and cyber security and the education that relates to it. How do those fit together? Are they complementary? Does it need to be a distinct focus, or can it be a similar focus?
Yeah, Governor, I think that's a, it's a key thing in thinking about going forward. And you know, the cyber threat advances so rapidly and is changing so quickly that it isn't something that we can afford to always be in a reactive mode about. And I would even argue, although it's important to increase our cyber workforce across the nation, at the end of the day, we're probably not going to be able to out-hire the threat, right? So this is why it becomes even more important in what you talk about is developing cyber-resistant or cyber-resilient networks, putting cyber resiliency to be built into all of the software, all of the coding. And so back to your point, it really becomes one of the key things is about designing a cyber resilient architecture. And for many reasons, that's one, to repel attacks, but it also may be, and especially, I think this is important for states and anything with national security, hospitals, as the governor mentioned, is that you have to be able to operate through a cyber attack. And maybe it's in a degraded mode, but you still have to be able to operate through. We can't afford emergency services or medical services to be shut down during a cyber attack, and we're never going to be able to repel or avoid 100% of those. It's how do we operate through that. And I will tell you that for Raytheon, we've moved away. We don't report on the number of attacks that we have. The metric that we report to our board of directors is dwell time, because we know that no matter how good our firewalls will be, there's always going to be a possibility that someone gets inside the network, or there will always be the threat of an insider threat. And so what we measure is that amount of time that an attack is persistent inside our network. And I would much rather have 100 penetrations for a minute than one penetration for 100 minutes. And so we look at that average dwell time, and that's the metric that we report to our board of directors.
Let me also mention an announcement that they want me to make today, that the Sands Institute, I know many states competed for these scholarships, and I am proud to announce today that they have chosen the 7 states, the winners of the collaboration and building the workforce of the 21st century for cybersecurity. The 7 states, Virginia, Rhode Island, Nevada, Hawaii, Michigan, Iowa, and Delaware, have now been chosen. And within those 7 states, the top 100 who participate in this program will each be given a $1,500 scholarship to study cybersecurity. and they will then go on to be able to access over $500,000 worth of scholarships. So let's give the Sands Institute a great round of applause for building that workforce of the 21st century.
Well, I just wanted to comment briefly. First, I want to thank all of you guys for taking the time to come here. And Matt, Spence, I want to thank you for your service. Obviously, you played a number of different roles to bring that experience now to our entrepreneurial community. You know, Colorado has, we have our own National Cybersecurity Center we stood up a couple of years ago. We had an old TRW defense contractor who had left a large building, 140,000 square foot building. We got the legislature to fund the rehab of that building. And we're really trying to find ways to build bridges between the, well, one is making sure that elected officials, and by that I mean not just governors, but mayors and city council members, county commissioners, have the education to deal with cybersecurity, not just in, I mean, they don't need to know how to code, obviously. They need to know how to allocate resources and assess threats. And we're doing a class, if anybody's board on November 1st through 3rd, we're doing a class down at the Broadmoor with the National Cybersecurity Center on just these issues of how to, in a day and a half, make sure people are competent to really understand at a deep level, and owe an awful lot to Governor McAuliffe and your initiative here. I want to appreciate that as well. Anyway, I wanted to ask Matt and the other guests as well, when you look at so much of what we're doing is around cybersecurity comes out of our Defense Department and our government, and we see a great concentrations of cybersecurity entrepreneurship built around places where those investments by the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security as well are made. How do we begin to accelerate the transferal of the research that's coming out of research institutions and make sure that that also is translating into businesses and jobs that are ultimately going to be the ones, I think, that help keep us safe?
So I think this really circles back to that education piece. You know, I've been lucky, I've been pretty successful thus far in my career. And a large part of that is because I've been able to surround myself by people that are way smarter than I am, which I'm sure everyone who's been successful does. And so making sure you have the right people involved. And, you know, we talked a little bit about how you can educate individuals to help make them you know, more effective in this space. We talked about Girls Who Code and starting early and sort of building in not only just technology, but certainly security into the curriculums there. A really, you know, an example that I like to bring up from time to time, Governor Ivey, I think you'll appreciate this one. The University of Alabama at Birmingham has a strong forensics program. It's actually a place where we found a number of candidates when I was working at Mandate a few years ago. Now, to be honest, I would not have thought that UAB would be a place that you would be able to source those candidates. You know, I start thinking of places like, you know, the Stanfords and the MITs of the world with this advanced technology. But what they saw was an opportunity. They pulled together the right people to do education. I think ultimately, you know, what's really, really important, as I mentioned, is, you know, starting early, getting people familiar with the technology, making sure that they understand how it connects to cybersecurity, and having them think and change their behavior. I think that those are the real keys, and then you have this set of people who can really help all of us understand the things that are emerging so that we can keep up with the way these things are evolving.
I think I'd add to that, Governor Hickenlooper, I think you're asking exactly the right question. So is how do you bridge that divide that you're talking about between what you're doing in the private sector and what happens at the Defense Department and other parts? And as I think about it, this may seem counterintuitive, but we spend a lot of time with technology policy and cybersecurity focusing on Congress or the White House. But our view is actually the most important technology policymakers are sitting around this table. They're the governors. I mean, really, when you look at the things that really matter, it is governors and mayors and working at these issues. And in a very practical way, there are two things to really bridge the divide that aren't particularly sexy, but are hugely important. And it's how the government buys and how the government hires. And what I mean by that is these cybersecurity problems are incredibly hard. They're evolving quickly, and the best thing that our country offers is we have amazing technology and amazing entrepreneurs which are anticipating the threats, which are looking for them, and finding ways to do that. The problem is it is incredibly hard for these entrepreneurs and innovators to sell to governments. Processes take too long. procurement is long and extensive. There are great companies like Tanium and others who we look at who have great ideas and are looking to go in, and it really needs to find a way to be able to purchase in a way that's more expedited and sell their great things. Now, there are ways to do great things in partnership with great companies like Raytheon and others, but also to make sure that when you find a great company and a great idea, allow the government to be a good customer. The second issue is hiring. And that is not just training and coding, which of course is critical, but when you have done that, find a way to allow those great people to come in and work for your governments. You know, you are working on incredibly important and interesting issues. And I know that the pay is nowhere near as good in the private sector, but that's not the issue. There are enormous mission-driven people who are desperate to come in and serve in the government, and it is just so, so hard. When I was at the Defense Department, I probably talked to 10 people a week who are eager to come and work for the government, work longer hours for less pay, but for a mission they cared about. And our answer was, I'm sorry, there's no website, there's no easy way to bring you in. And when I walked out of the Pentagon, the national security issue I was most concerned about was not ISIS, and it was not Iran, and it was not Syria, but was whether that we were equipped in our government to open the door to the most talented people to come and work for us. And I think that is an enormously huge challenge, which those of you around this table have enormous power to do something about. And for that, it's heartening that you've invited us to talk about this, and it's a huge privilege, because I think part of what that is, and Governor Hickenlooper, this gets to your question, is really having a conversation between innovation and the most important policymakers here. And one thing that we try to do at our firm is have that conversation between what you're doing, talk about what some entrepreneurs are doing. I look around the table, and Governor Ducey has made a trip to Silicon Valley and visit our office to talk with several entrepreneurs who are doing things. Governor McAuliffe did the same. And if any of you would be interested in coming to the mean streets of Silicon Valley, you know, in January or February perhaps, when it's beautiful out there, but in all honesty, we would love to host you, not to meet with me or other folks, but to talk with some of the people who are really inventing the greatest ideas of the future, who are eager to talk to you about partnership, about what their technologies can do to help solve the incredibly vexing issues that you're dealing with. Cybersecurity, infrastructure, homelessness, healthcare, and to have a conversation that really bridges what I think unfortunately is still a pretty enormous divide between what is happening in technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, and what problems need to be solved in the types of regulation opportunities and great thinking that is all around this room.
And Governor, just as a quick follow-up, the basic business model that Raytheon has put together with our commercial division called ForcePoint is to take those defense-grade cyber solutions that we employ in our products around the world with the intelligence services and with the various branches of the military, and to be able to, as the threat rapidly advances, essentially work through the process of deciding which ones of those can now be commercially available, moving that over to our commercial part of the company, and then selling that as a commercial package, as a cyber package that a small business, a bank, a government, a state government, a university can purchase then to provide a constantly updated cyber protection package.
I'll add one thing very quickly. I apologize for extending this out, but I do think too the other opportunity that you have is you're, as you hire great engineers, you're going to start writing code that is going to solve some problems for the state governments. When I was at Facebook, one of the things that we really focused on was giving back, because we had a lot of real privilege to have a great set of software engineers, and so we would open source a number of different tools, and I think that's an opportunity also for states to attract the talent that you're looking for. Right? This is coming to someone saying, listen, you're going to be able to support the mission, and when you're done, you're going to be able to give this software back and help, whether it's other states, other companies, what have you. And so you build this reputation around what you're doing, and I think states are in a unique position because of their role to do exactly that.
Governor Meade.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for your leadership on this. A great panel and a great discussion. My question is, it seems that we occasionally read in the papers that a city or a town or a state's been attacked, say, by ransomware, and then the next day you hear it at another state. And my question is, I know, for example, the Council of Governors has been working on this, states have been working on this, NGA has been working on this, but I would be interested in hearing the panel's opinion on, is there a better way for us to share information? It seems difficult when we have the federal government, the state governments, local governments, and then you have the private sector, you know, competing against one another. But if we had an opportunity to learn from one another, to warn one another about threats that have happened, because if my state gets hacked and then 2 days later by the same scheme another state gets hacked, we have an opportunity perhaps to do a better job and share perhaps through a national alert system or something to prevent us from different states or communities or companies suffering the same sort of scheme. So I guess first, maybe Matt, your opinion on that. Are we doing a good job? And two, is there opportunity in the future to do better in sharing information and help learn from one another to protect one another?
Governor, that's a great question. And there are efforts like this to have this conversation around the table about cybersecurity, which is an important first step. But the reality is we're not ready, and we are not doing enough to share information. Part of the reason for that is, in a weird way, it's actually the wrong thing to say the word cybersecurity. I mean, we talk about that, and you talk about cyber, but those who actually specialize in this talk about security. You know, it's actually security which permeates everything. There's physical security, there are threats from cyber entries, there are other pieces, and they're all very much related. So the reason why that's an important point to keep in mind is when you're sharing information, thinking about it, it's not something in a particular bucket. It's really something that permeates a whole range of things. And your constituents and voters, they're not thinking of the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Defense or a local government or state government is dealing with things. They just know that they don't want fraud to happen. They don't want things that are very sensitive that they keep on their iPhone to get elsewhere. And they don't want all the tremendous and amazing opportunity of technologies that they buy create a lot of new windows and doors that some cyber burglar can break into. So I think a big part right now is to have better coordination mechanisms, both between jurisdictions, because the nature of cybersecurity is there's always going to be things that are overlapping, but we need to do much more of that. But then the second piece is to increase trust and collaboration between the private sector and governments to do this. We spend a lot of time talking about bringing Washington, the technology sector, together, but it's even more at the state capitals to do much of this north. So if I was thinking about an agenda about what can happen at the regulatory and government level, finding ways to more quickly share information, do it better, is really the key. I think we're living in a world right now which is very much of the pre-9/11 intelligence community area. You know, we have heard the many, many stories about different intelligence groups knew something and knew what, and it wasn't really out of ill will or anything someone wanted to do that we left ourselves vulnerable. We just had not modernized our system. And now it's time for us to take that next step, to find ways to take a step forward to modernize that and better share that type of information.
Governor Burgum. One question for Chris and one for Matt. Chris, Tanium is one of the fastest growing cyber companies right now in the world. Maybe you'd like to share a little bit on what the market signals are telling you and why, what problem you're trying to solve and how you're approaching it and why people find that so attractive. And for Matt, I know that Andreessen not only invests in startups, you also strategically look at places that are where the next thing is coming, and what do you think is the big unsolved problem, and where's the next Tanium going to come from that Andreessen's looking for?
Well, of course, I'm happy to talk about the technology. It's kind of my role, so I'm pretty excited about that. So really, the thing that we're tackling is something that I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is really scale. It's very hard to manage these massive networks, and they're only getting bigger. I think I read something the other day that there are about 8.4 billion devices that are connected right now, and that's up, I think, like 31%. And that's going to just grow tremendously over the years. And so one of the things that we as a company did was try and say, okay, well, we can't sort of do this in a traditional way. What's another approach we can use to start handling the massive scale of these environments? And so that is really what drove the innovation, and that's what helps our technology succeed. And I think what's interesting for me is I think about it, and I think about all of the initiatives that are helping, like as I mentioned, constituents get great new things through technology, be enabled through technology, the growth of devices. People talk a lot about the Internet of Things for whatever definition they have for that. But at the end of the day, all of those are devices that are interconnected in some way, shape, or form and are able to share data back and forth. And what we have really focused on is being able to scale to that size. And I think that is what has made us successful because we sort of recognized that was coming, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Governor, that's a really interesting question and sense one of the favorite parts about my job as we look at what's coming down next. So there are two things right now. On the security front, what's really exciting is there are threats that we might not be thinking about that we need to be defending against. One, for example, is when you call someone on a phone, you assume that someone knows that's your voice, you're there, but how do you really know? And for example, there's one company we're invested in called Pindrop Security that works on the integrity of your voice to make sure that when you're speaking that someone knows it's actually you, was use that as a variety of identity. So I think that's one. The other piece, and this relates a little bit to cybersecurity about some of the most exciting areas of innovation, is artificial intelligence and what's called machine learning. And so a lot of the things that actually would seem to be 10 or 20 years in the future are actually happening pretty closely here, which have a lot of implications for things that governors are doing. So for example, artificial intelligence, recently was actually commissioned to actually write articles based out of the last Olympics. Artificial intelligence has spent time actually trying to write music or write speeches. There is a company that actually merges a lot of interesting health technology plus artificial intelligence to take the huge amount of data we generate from our Apple Watch to provide better health outcomes. There's a company called Cardiogram that analyzes your heartbeat from your Apple Watch, takes all that data, and can predict a heart attack faster than the best cardiologists at the best medical schools in the United States. And those types of things are interesting, to take technology and take data to make your population healthier, which can produce a whole range of things that are good for that. So I guess what I get most excited about, I talked about opportunities before, are the opportunities for these types of things that are doing things, they're not even 10 years in the future, they're a few years in the future, or even they're happening right now, and they're really cool things that have been able to happen.
Any more questions? Carney?
I know it's a constant challenge to make sure that we provide funding for technology in state government. It's a battle that we have to fight. But one of the things that often falls by the wayside is cybersecurity, the continuous monitoring and assessments and training that you need to do. Do you have a recommended percentage of an IT budget for a state that should be spent on cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think gets to the issue is, for a while it become cliche to say, you're going to be hacked, everyone's going to be hacked. And if you say that to a corporate board, they say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with that? If it's all going to happen, I just want to put my head into the covers. And when you're a company, or much like if you're a state, you're dealing in a resource-constrained environment. You don't have the luxury to spend an unlimited amount of money on the vast of problems that you have. And so the key is really thinking about prioritization. And I think there are two ways to think about prioritization as you think about that. One is to prioritize your types of assets and what really is critical and critical infrastructure. But the other piece is actually to think about prioritizing information. And this may seem counterintuitive. We spend a lot of time thinking about the perimeter of security, and that is to stop someone from getting into your house, right? So you can lock the doors and put bars on the windows, but there are a lot of cracks and a lot of ways to get into your house. What shouldn't happen is once you get in your house, you get everything. You get the best jewelry, you can walk out with anything you want. And if we think about it, we, in a sense, treat a lot of our information that's on our networks as very much the same. If you're in the government, when I was at the White House, we had different layers of information. You have unclassified information, you have confidential information, you have things marked as secret, you have things marked as top secret, and then you have a level of security clearance even above that, which has the most sensitive ways about how our government gathers intelligence. So just because you work at the White House, you don't get access to all that information. You know, just because you happen to walk in the door, you can't do everything. And even just because you have a security clearance, you don't get all of that. So as you think about prioritizing IT budgets and these types of things, part of it is thinking about ranking and understanding what happens when someone's in your network, what are really the crown jewels, and what are the things that you really don't want to get out but are sort of less important, and taking just a more strategic approach rather than assuming once someone's in, everything bad is going to happen.
Governor, I'd like to offer just a couple of other thoughts on that, and that is, you know, some of the basic things that you can start with that really, you know, don't cost much and wouldn't have to be viewed as a percentage of the budget towards cybersecurity is, you know, the first question is, does every state have a chief information officer that reports directly to the governor, and does that CIO have a seat at the table in, you know, most all decisions, especially any purchasing decision? Because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it is about thinking about the architecture of your system. So as different universities, hospitals, any state-run things, thinking about is the architecture designed to be cyber resilient, and do you have some standards around things like authentication or multi-factor authentication? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities where the cyber resiliency can be built into systems, and it's not at an additional cost. It's about thinking about an overall architecture and having someone designated as that cyber czar that has oversight and influence into state-level decisions about what IT systems are procured and what the requirements are levied on those.
You know, Governor, I can't say I have a direct answer for you. I don't have a great percentage. I really wish that I did. You know, at the end of the day, I'm actually a pretty simplistic guy. I try and get back to basics and do the simple things right. And I think when you think about the way that you allocate budgets, you're often thinking about, you know, hey, what's the most important things, and really targeting getting those things done well. And so for me, you know, one of the things that I have seen certainly is challenges where, you know, organizations are really trying to use this cutting edge thing or the latest interesting thing that they heard about or read about, when really, as Wes sort of alluded to, it gets back to basics and about spending and focusing on those basics, right? For example, at Tanium, one of the things that we see oftentimes is we'll go into an environment and you know, we'll just say, hey, you want to use our technology? We'll go in there, we'll show you how it works. You can play around with it for a little bit. And we first say, okay, well, you know, where are all your systems? And they say, well, yeah, we have this list or we have this set of systems. And then we go in and we find, I don't know, we're anywhere from 12 to 20% more systems than they expected. And so if you don't even have a view of exactly what you've got, and you're not focusing on first solving that fundamental problem with the limited budget that you have, then there's a significant challenge there. And then you stack onto that the idea that, you know, you have limited budgets and limited number of people to solve these problems for you. And so you want to make sure you make the best use out of those people. And again, I think this connects back to something that I'm beginning to sound a little bit like a broken record on, which is scale. How do you not only scale to the technology, but how do you scale your people? Use them as effectively as you can so that they can get those fundamental problems solved effectively as well.
Okay, well, first of all, let's give a round of applause to Matt, Wes, and Chris. Thank them for their great leadership here today. As we close out this opening session, let me remind you that everybody has this packet. I would also like to recognize Governor Ivory, our newest member here from the great state of Alabama. Give her a great round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Anything you'd like to say, Governor?
We're just proud to be here. We're eager to get to know each one of you. And yes, we are on top of cyber activity in Alabama as well, but I'm grateful to be here and look forward to working with you.
Great, thank you very much. So you all have this booklet. It's got one-pagers in it, front and back. You can pull out one specific. It is constantly going to be updated by our cyber team. I would ask you to take this back with you, give it to your team. Make sure you're bringing your adjunct general. Make sure you're bringing your National Guard, your CIO. Get your whole team. I would call, as a governor, I would call everybody into your office, in your conference room. Make sure they have this. so that they know what they have to do. It is critical that you bring your National Guard in early and able to make sure of the sharing of information, and they are part of this process in your states. I also want to thank the governors for, we have signed a compact here for Meet the Threat. We have 38 states. I thank those governors who have signed on to this compact. We will now have a continuous dialogue as we go forward. As I say, this is an evolving space. Every day there is something new as it relates to cybersecurity. Our team and the private sector folks here, I want to thank them for helping us stay up to date. And I do want to thank the corporate sponsors who have funded this initiative. So on behalf of the National Governors Association, I want to thank all the folks who have been part of this process. And now I will adjourn our first session, and we'll see you a little bit this afternoon. Thank you very much.